took the night shift job at the old Bowdoin Undercroft station because I needed to disappear, and the forgotten labyrinthine veins of the Boston subway system, especially the silent, echoing platforms that slumbered beneath the city's relentless felt like the perfect place to become a ghost long before my time was officially up. My name is Darren Holt, and the university scandal, the one surrounding Amelia Cartwright's fatal fall from the observatory roof. A fall I witnessed from my dorm window, a silent, paralyzed spectator whose silence then became a damning indictment, had made my face, my name, a little too recognizable in the circles I once frequented. The interview for the subterranean maintenance and oversight position at the MBTA was less an interview and more a tired, seen-it-all supervisor, handing me a heavy ring of tarnished brass keys and a crumpled, coffee-stained, typewritten note detailing 3 bizarre rules for ensuring after-hours tranquility at the Bowdoin terminus. He grunted, his eyes bloodshot and weary, that the last guy who asked too many questions about the woman in the tattered wedding dress, the one who always appeared around 11:30, ended up trying to board a phantom red line train that hadn't actually run on that particular spur since the Great Molasses Flood of 1919. The Bowdoin Undercroft station was a relic, a seldom-used appendage of the Blue Line, buried deep beneath the city's historic West End. Its primary function these days seemed to be as a turnaround point for late-night trains, a place where the Iron Serpent sighed and rested before plunging back into the city's arterial darkness. During my graveyard shift from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., genuine passengers were rarer than a smile from my supervisor. The silence was the most unnerving part. It was a thick, palpable silence, broken only by the rhythmic drip-drip of unseen water, the distant rumble of trains on other lines vibrating through the ancient stonework, and the occasional unsettling groan of the station itself, as if the sick earth were shifting uncomfortably in its sleep. The air was perpetually cool, heavy with the scent of damp concrete, ozone from the third rail, metallic brake dust, and something else, a faint, persistent, coppery tang, like old, dry blood, subtly perfuming the stale darkness. The fluorescent lights that lined the cavernous platform were mostly functional, but they flickered erratically, sometimes in unsettling, almost rhythmic patterns that played tricks on the eyes, making the shadows in the deep recesses of the access tunnel dance and writhe. My supervisor, a man named Henderson, whose face was a roadmap of exhaustion, had given me the rules on that first night, his voice a gravelly monotone that suggested he'd recited them countless times before, to countless other hopefuls, most of other hopefuls, whom, I gathered, hadn't lasted long. Bowdoin Undercroft, night protocols, strict adherence required. Every night at 11:32 p.m., a woman in a wedding dress will ask for directions to the church that burned down. Always point to the north access tunnel, even though it is a sealed passage and leads nowhere. When a passenger, if any, asks what time does the 2:47 train arrive, you must inform them that it is always running approximately 3 minutes late, even though no train is scheduled or runs on this line at 2:47 a.m. If you hear children laughing, or the distinct sound of childhood games, singing, jump rope, etc., emanating from any active or inactive tunnel after 3:00 a.m., do not investigate. The sounds are a residual phenomenon. They have been playing down there since 1904. I remember reading the list under the flickering platform lights, a cynical smirk playing on my lips. Hazing, clearly. A bit of local folklore spun to spook the new night guy at Boston's oldest, deepest, and arguably creepiest subway station. My past, the one I was trying to bury beneath a layer of MBTA grime and graveyard shift anonymity, had made me deeply skeptical of everything and everyone. Ghost stories were the least of my worries. My first few nights were largely uneventful, if deeply unsettling. The solitude was a heavy blanket, the station clock, An ancient, round-faced behemoth above the token booth sometimes seemed to stutter, its minute hand visibly jerking backwards a few seconds before resuming its slow forward crawl. I often felt a prickling sensation on the back of my neck, the distinct unnerving feeling of being watched from the yawning blackness of the disused tunnels that branched off the main platform. I met Danny Knox on my second night. He was 19, maybe 20, a rookie janitor on probation, his T-pass clipped to his overalls, pushing a clattering bucket and mop with a kind of nervous energy. He was good-natured, quick with a jumpy laugh, and seemed as unnerved by the station's oppressive atmosphere as I pretended not to be. We shared a few lukewarm coffees and nervous jokes about the creaks and groans of the old girl. Then, on my third night, at precisely 11:32 p.m., according to that ancient stuttering clock, she appeared. One moment the platform was empty, echoing with the drip of unseen water. The next, she was there, standing perhaps 20 feet away, near the edge of the tracks, as if she had coalesced from the damp, chill air itself. The bride. She was pale, almost translucent in the flickering fluorescent light, her form slender and sorrowful. Her wedding dress, what I could see of it, was in a style I vaguely recognized from old photographs. High-necked, long-sleeved, probably from the turn of the last century, but it was tattered, stained with what looked like mud and rust, and perpetually, inexplicably soaked, as if she just walked through a torrential downpour. Her dark hair was plastered to her skull, and her eyes were like dark, empty tunnels, holding an ancient, unplumbable grief. She didn't walk so much as glide, her movements unnervingly smooth, making no sound on the grimy concrete. A faint, almost imperceptible scent accompanied her. Damp earth, rain-soaked wool, and the acrid, unmistakable smell of burnt wood. She glided closer, her gaze fixed on me, those empty eyes seeming to see right through me. Her voice, when she spoke, was a whispery, sighing rustle, like dry leaves skittering across a forgotten grave. "Excuse me," she breathed, the words seeming to form from the very air around her. "Can you direct me to the church? The one that burned down?" My heart hammered against my ribs. This was real. Remembering the first rule, my voice a dry croak I barely recognized, I raised a trembling hand and pointed towards the dark, yawning maw of the north access tunnel, a gaping black hole in the station wall, its tracks long since removed, its passage long since removed, visibly blocked by a crudely constructed breeze block wall perhaps 50 feet in. "That way, ma'am. Just down there." The bride nodded slowly, a single sorrowful inclination of her head. She offered no thanks, just glided silently towards the indicated tunnel, and disappeared into its impenetrable blackness without a sound. The air she left behind was frigid, carrying that lingering scent of ash and rain. After she was gone, I walked over to the spot on the platform where she had first appeared. Lying on the grimy concrete was a single wilted white rose. Its petals were tinged with brown at the edges, as if lightly scorched. As I reached down to touch it, it crumbled into a fine, gray dust that the next passing draft from the tunnels whisked away into nothingness. The appearance of the bride became a nightly ritual, a fixed point in the shifting, unsettling landscape of my graveyard shift. Always at 11:32 p.m. Always the same question. Always the same sorrowful glide into the black maw of the north tunnel. And always that faint, lingering scent of burnt wood and damp earth, sometimes accompanied by another scorched rose petal that would dissolve at my touch. I never got used to it. Each encounter left me with a residue of cold dread that clung to me like the tunnel damp. The second rule came into play a few nights later, It was well past 2 a.m., the station wrapped in its customary tomb-like silence. I was in the token booth, trying to make sense of a century's worth of faded logbooks and maintenance reports, when a figure materialized on the platform. I hadn't heard a train arrive, hadn't heard the click of the ancient turnstiles. One moment the platform was empty. The next, a man was there. He was disheveled, his clothes rumpled, his eyes wide and carrying a hunted, anxious look. He kept glancing nervously down the empty tracks. He approached the booth, his knuckles white as he gripped the grimy brass rail. "Excuse me," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. The 2:47 train arrive." My mind flashed to the second rule. When a passenger, if any, asks what time does the 2:47 train arrive, you must inform them that it is always running approximately 3 minutes late, even though no train is scheduled or runs on this line at 2:47 a.m. The absurdity of it was palpable. There was no 2:47 train. There hadn't been for decades, if ever, on this forgotten spur. But the man's desperate, almost pleading gaze unnerved me. It's always running about 3 minutes late, sir." I managed, my voice sounding hollow even to my own ears. A flicker of something relief. Resignation passed across the man's face. He nodded, a jerky, almost spastic movement. 3 minutes. Right, thank you. He shuffled away from the booth, towards the edge of the platform, and stood there, staring intently into the black, empty tunnel from which no train would ever come. I watched him, a growing sense of unease prickling my skin. I busied myself with the logbooks, trying to ignore him. When I looked up again, perhaps 5 minutes later, he was gone. Vanished. No sound of a train arriving or departing. No click of the turnstiles, just an empty platform and the echoing drip of water. It was as if he'd been a figment of the station's own troubled dreams. It was around this time that Cassie Lynn started appearing. And she was a graduate student from Boston University, specializing in urban folklore and the city's more obscure, macabre histories. She was bright, energetic, with an infectious curiosity and a refreshing lack of fear that was a stark contrast to my own growing dread. She'd arrived late, armed with a notebook, a digital recorder, and an insatiable appetite for the tales that clung to the subway's grimy underbelly like old chewing gum. "The Bowdoin Undercroft is a nexus, Darren," she told me one night, her eyes shining with academic fervor as she sketched the crumbling tilework on the station walls. "A convergence point for so many of the city's older tragedies. The East Boston Tunnel construction disaster of 1904 is practically woven into the fabric of this place. Dozens killed, and the persistent rumors of the Veiled Bride of Bowdoin and the lost children of Tunnel 9, they all seem to emanate from this specific nexus." I was wary of her at first, reluctant to share the station's more specific peculiarities, but her genuine interest and the meticulously researched articles and old newspaper clippings she started bringing me slowly chipped away at my reserve. She showed me accounts of the 1904 disaster, grainy photographs of grim-faced rescue workers, and one particularly unsettling, almost illegible report that mentioned strange, unsettling symbols being found on the tunnel walls. Before that section, the North Access Tunnel, the one I directed the bride towards every night, was permanently sealed. And then there was the unconfirmed, almost folkloric tale of a young bride on her way to her wedding at a church near the then newly extended tunnel entrance, who was caught in the catastrophic collapse. Her body, and that of her groom, never recovered from the tons of mud and debris. The church itself, the story went, had caught fire during the ensuing chaos and burned to the ground. One particularly grim, rainy morning, as I was about to head home after my shift, I found something glinting in a rusty drainage grate at the far end of the platform, near the entrance to the sealed north tunnel. It was an old, heavily tarnished silver locket, shaped like a heart. Its clasp was broken. I pried it open with my penknife. Inside, protected by a discolored piece of celluloid, was a tiny, faded daguerreotype. It depicted a young woman in an elaborate, high-colored wedding dress, her features mostly obscured by water damage and age. But her smile, though faint, was heartbreakingly sweet. On the inside of the locket's other half, almost too small to read, was a barely legible, engraved inscription. My dearest Dee, forever thine. June 17th, 1904. The unsettling rhythm of the Bowdoin Undercroft continued, each night layering fresh anxieties onto my already frayed nerves. The station itself seemed to be aware. The flickering lights were no longer random. They seemed to pulse in response to my movements, to my moods. Sometimes, when I was alone in the vast, echoing space, I'd hear faint, mournful singing, or whispers that seemed to ride the cold drafts gusting from the tunnels. Words, always just beyond the threshold of understanding, like snatches of forgotten conversations. Fleeting shadows danced at the periphery of my vision, too quick to focus on, always gone when I turned my head. Danny Knox, the rookie janitor, was my only semi-regular human contact during those long, dark hours. He was still jumpy, still prone to whistling nervously as he mopped the grimy platform tiles. But his presence was a small, albeit fragile, anchor to reality. He'd started to notice things too. "Hey, Darren," he'd said one night, his young face pale under the harsh fluorescent lights. You ever hear kids down here laughing like..." My blood ran cold. Rule of 3. If you hear children laughing, or the distinct sound of childhood games, singing, jump rope, etc., emanating from any active or inactive tunnel after 3:00 a.m., do not investigate. The sounds are a residual phenomena. They have been playing down there since 1904. "Yeah," Danny had said, trying to sound casual. "Station acoustics are weird. Old pipes wind in the tunnels, plays tricks on you." But then, a few nights later, at precisely 3:03 a.m. according to the stuttering station clock, it began. Faint at first, then growing steadily, unmistakably clearer, the sound of children laughing. Not the joyful, carefree laughter of a playground, but something hollower, repetitive, almost metallic. It was accompanied by a rhythmic thump, 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 like a jump rope hitting pavement, and the faint sing-song chant of a children's game I couldn't quite place. It was coming from deep within one of the active train tunnels, the one the late-night Blue Line train still used. Danny heard it too. He froze, his mop clattering to the platform. "See? I told you. It's not pipes, man." Despite my increasingly urgent recitation of the third rule, despite the palpable sense of dread that suddenly filled the station, a mixture of youthful bravado and a macabre curiosity got the better of him. I'm just gonna take a quick look, see what's what. Probably just some dumbass teenagers messing around, right? Trying to spook us." He grabbed his heavy MBT flashlight. "Danny, no!" I hissed. "Oh, the rules." But he was already heading towards the tunnel mouth, his flashlight beam cutting a nervous swath into the oppressive darkness. "Be right back," he called, his voice echoing unnaturally. He didn't come right back. After an agonizing 10 minutes, then 20, then nearly an hour of shouting his name into the echoing blackness with no response, I knew something was terribly wrong. Against every screaming instinct, against the cold, hard certainty of that third rule, I grabbed my own flashlight and cautiously entered the tunnel. The air inside was frigid, thick with the smell of ozone and something else, something acrid and old, like dust from a disturbed tomb. I called Danny's name again. Only the echo answered, and the faint, persistent thump, thump, thump of that unseen jump rope, and the chilling, repetitive peals of childish laughter, seeming to come from just around the next bend. I found Danny's flashlight first. It was lying on the grimy ballast between the tracks, still lit, its beam pointing towards a section of the tunnel wall. There, crudely drawn in what looked like white chalk, was a hopscotch grid, the numbers faded and uneven. Further down, near a rusted, grimy access panel set into the curving wall, a panel I'd never noticed before, I found Danny's MBTA radio. It was lying on the ground, switched on, emitting a low hiss of static, and beneath the static, barely audible, but undeniably there, was the sound of children laughing, and that relentless, rhythmic thump-thump of the jump rope. It was a loop, an endless, horrifying loop. There was no sign of Danny Knox himself, only on the grimy, sweating tunnel wall beside the access panel were several small, dark, smudged handprints. They were too small, far too small to be an adult's, and they looked disturbingly fresh. Later that morning, after the sun had risen and the city above had roared back to life, a man in an MBTA engineer's uniform arrived at the Bowdoin Undercroft. He introduced himself as Everett Salvo. He was in his early 30s, with a surprisingly friendly, open face and an easy smile that didn't quite reach his oddly watchful, pale blue eyes. He was here, he said, to investigate a minor signal fault that had been reported on the blue line near the Bowdoin terminus during the night. When I hesitantly, and with much self-censorship, mentioned Danny's disappearance, Salvo's brow furrowed with what looked like genuine concern. "Young Knox. Damn shame. Kids these days, they get into the tunnels sometimes looking for thrills. Probably just got spooked by the dark and found another way out. He'll turn up, don't you worry." He clapped me on the shoulder with a reassuring familiarity that felt slightly easy to get turned around, especially if you don't know the lay of the land. He then, with an almost casual air, offered me an old, rolled-up schematic of the Bowdoin Undercroft and its adjacent tunnel systems. "Found this in the archives. Might be useful for you, navigating the older sections, just in case." He winked. It seemed like a kind gesture. But later, when I unrolled the brittle, yellowed schematic under the harsh light of my cheap apartment, I noticed something else. In a corner of the drawing, marked in very faint, almost invisible pencil, branching off the sealed north access tunnel, the one the bride glided into every night, was another, smaller, unlabeled platform. It was designated only with a tiny anchor-like symbol I didn't recognize, and beside it, a single, chillingly precise date, June 17th, 1904, Platform 13. The discovery of the hidden Platform 13 on Everett Salvo's schematic became an obsession. Danny Knox was still officially listed as absent without leave, but I knew with a cold, sickening certainty that he wasn't coming back. His endlessly looping laughter on that abandoned radio was now a permanent fixture in my nightmares. The locket I'd found, with its tragic inscription and the date June 17th, 1904, felt heavy in my pocket, a tangible link to the station's sorrowful past. I showed the schematic and the locket to Cassie Lynn. Her usual academic enthusiasm was instantly replaced by a grim, focused intensity. "Platform 13, she murmured, her fingers tracing the faint pencil lines. The 1904 East Boston Tunnel disaster happened on June 16th, but the main cave-in, the one that trapped the most workers and the bride, that was in the early hours of June 17th. She threw herself into the city's archives, cross-referencing old MBTA blueprints, newspaper accounts yellowed with age, and obscure, privately published pamphlets on Boston's forgotten tragedies. She uncovered more than just historical data. She found whispers, folkloric accounts that had been dismissed as mass hysteria at the time. Reports from the 1904 recovery workers spoke of a section of the collapsed tunnel that was profoundly unnatural, where the air was colder than any winter ice, and where some men claimed to have heard wailing and sorrowful singing, even when no victims, living or dead, were nearby. Most chillingly, several independent, almost identical accounts mentioned strange, unsettling symbols found etched into the original bedrock of the tunnel walls before that entire section. The one leading to the supposed north access spur was dynamited and permanently sealed, not just for structural reasons, but as one foreman's private journal entry put it, to quiet the unquietable and seal away that which man was not meant to disturb. Armed with salvo schematic, Cassie's research, and a growing sense of both dread and grim determination, we decided we had to find it. We had to see Platform 13. Danny? I found out from a tearful, hushed confession from another janitor, had left behind a few scattered, blood-smeared notes in his locker before he vanished. They were mostly incoherent ramblings about a game that never ends, and the lady in white who seeks her lost groom in the dark. But one phrase stood out, underlined several times. The children know the way. Follow the laughter to where the walls weep. Following Danny's terrible clue, and a series of almost invisible maintenance markers on salvo schematic that corresponded to ventilation shafts and forgotten service hatches, we found a way into the sealed north access tunnel. It involved prying open a rusted heavy iron grate in a disused utility corridor far from the main platform. A corridor that smelled strongly of stagnant water and something else. Something like cold, wet ash. The tunnel beyond was a time capsule of decay and oppressive silence. The air was frigid, instantly chilling us to the bone, and carried that same faint, unsettling scent I associated with the bride. Damp earth, stale, funereal flowers, and burnt wood. After what felt like an eternity of navigating collapsed timbers and treacherous debris-strewn tracks by the weak beams of our flashlights, we found it. Platform 13. It was smaller than the main Bowdoin Undercroft platform, and far older, its crumbling tiles bearing faded advertisements for corsets and patent medicines I'd only ever seen in history books. Rusted, skeletal tracks disappeared into a blackness so profound it seemed to swallow the light. The air here was even colder, the silence absolute, yet it felt occupied, watched, as if we had stepped out of time into a place where the tragedies of 1904 were not history, but a perpetually unfolding present. And on the curving tunnel walls behind the platform, beneath layers of grime, newer concrete patching, and what looked like ancient dried bloodstains, Cassie found them. The symbols. They weren't crude graffiti. They were meticulously etched into the original stonework, precise, geometric, and deeply, primordially unsettling. Cassie, her face pale in the flashlight beam, her breath pluming in the frigid air, recognized them with a gasp of dawning horror. "Dear God, Darren," she whispered, her voice trembling. These aren't just random markings. This is necromancy. 19th century ritual magic. Specifically, rites associated with binding powerful spirits to a location. Or creating a gateway. A permanent one. Near the largest, most complex array of symbols, she pointed to another series of carvings, much newer, crudely scratched into the stone alongside the ancient etchings. Dates and initials, a horrifying chronological list. The earliest date was from the late 1800s, even before the 1904 disaster, suggesting something else had been here first. The dates continued sporadically through the decades: 1927, 1953, 1978, 1997, Harold Lott's final year. And then the most recent entry, dated only a few weeks ago, scratched with a freshness that made my skin crawl, were two stark initials: D.H. Darren Holt. As we stared at my initials, A wave of unimaginable cold swept through Platform 13. The faint, sorrowful sighing we'd occasionally heard in the tunnels intensified, resolving into a single heartbroken whisper that seemed to emanate from the very stones around us. And at the far end of the decaying platform, half hidden in the Stygian blackness where the tracks disappeared, the bride glided into view. She wasn't asking for directions this time. She was simply watching us. Her spectral form seemed more substantial here, her sorrow more palpable, her eyes like bottomless pits of ancient grief. She raised one pale, translucent hand, not in threat, but as if in acknowledgement, or perhaps in warning. Cassie, ever the academic, instinctively raised her digital camera and took a flash photograph of the wall with the necromantic symbols and the list of initials. The flash momentarily illuminated the entire platform in a harsh, stark light. When she immediately looked at the image preview on her camera's small LCD screen, she let out a small, choked cry and thrust the camera at me. The photo showed the symbols clearly. It showed the list of initials, my own stark and accusing, but superimposed over the ancient ritualistic etchings, as if he were a ghostly afterimage burned into the very stone, was the faint, transparent, but unmistakably smiling face of Everett Salvo. He was looking directly at the camera, right at us, an expression of cold, reptilian triumph in his pale blue eyes. He hadn't been physically with us on Platform 13. He hadn't needed to be. His design was already in place. The image of Everett Salvo's triumphant, spectral face burned into the stone of Platform 13 was a chilling confirmation. He wasn't just a friendly maintenance engineer. He was an architect of this subterranean horror, a puppet master pulling strings that stretched back over a century. My initials, DH, scratched alongside those other doomed names, felt like a death sentence already signed and sealed. We scrambled out of the North Access Tunnel, back into the marginally less terrifying, though still oppressive, atmosphere of the main Bowdoin Undercroft. The bride remained on Platform 13, a silent, sorrowful sentinel in her forgotten kingdom. Cassie was pale, but resolute, her academic curiosity now replaced by a grim, focused anger. "Case been grooming this place, Darren," she said, her voice tight as she scrolled through her research notes on her tablet, the screen's cold light illuminating her determined face. The 1904 disaster wasn't the beginning. It was an amplification. Whatever was here before, whatever those original necromantic rites were trying to achieve, the mass death, the psychic trauma of the collapse, it supercharged it. And Salvo, or his predecessors, they've been tending to it, feeding it. Feeding it what? I asked, the metallic taste of fear coppery on my tongue. Or who? Candidates, Cassie said, her gaze meeting mine, dark and serious. The list of initials, the dates, they correspond with unexplained disappearances, freak accidents within the MBTA system, particularly around this station, stretching back decades. Salvo isn't just maintaining the tracks, Darren. He's maintaining a ritual, a sacrificial cycle. We found Salvo in the main relay room, a cramped, humming space filled with banks of antiquated electrical equipment and blinking lights tucked away behind the token booth. He was calmly replacing a series of fuses, his friendly demeanor back in place, though his eyes, when he saw us, held a new, reptilian stillness. "Mr. Holt, Miss Lynn," he straightened up, wiping his hands on a rag. "Unexpected visitors. Is there a problem with the station's ambience?" There was a subtle, mocking emphasis on the last word. "We know about Platform 13. Salvo," I said, my voice harder than I expected. "We know about the symbols. And the names. My name." Salvo's friendly mask didn't entirely drop, but it thinned, revealing the cold, calculating intellect beneath. "Ah, so the historical archives have proven illuminating. He gave a sigh as if disappointed in our precociousness. A pity. The element of uninformed consent often enhances the resonance. Consent to what? Cassie demanded, her voice shaking but firm. To being a human sacrifice for your sick little cult. Salvo actually chuckled. A dry, humorless sound. Cult? Cult? My dear Miss Lynn, we are merely custodians. Caretakers of a unique confluence. The 1904 event didn't just create ghosts. It tore a delicate seam in the fabric of what you perceive as reality. Right here beneath Bowdoin. A conduit, the bride, tragic figure though she is, became its unintentional gatekeeper. An oracle, if you possess the wit to interpret her sorrow. Our society, for generations, has sought to understand, to harness, perhaps even to correct certain historical deviations through this conduit. Correct history? I scoffed. By killing people? Not killing, Mr. Holt. Salvo corrected smoothly. Integrating the chosen individuals, those like yourself with a certain predisposition, a unique psychic signature, a vulnerability born of past trauma or unresolved grief. They don't die. They become part of the platform's energy. They strengthen the conduit. They prepare the way for the great correction, a resetting of this city's accumulated imbalances. He smiled, a truly terrifying expression of serene, fanatical conviction. Danny Knox, for instance, was an unforeseen but useful preliminary attunement. Your own integration, Mr. Holt, is scheduled to complete the current cycle. As he spoke, the lights in the relay room began to flicker violently, in the same disturbing rhythmic patterns I'd noticed on the platform. The air grew frigid, and the faint scent of burnt wood and damp earth, the bride's signature, seeped into the room. The rules you were given, Salvo continued, his voice taking on a near-hypnotic cadence. They are not arbitrary, Mr. Holt. They are filters, gentle pressures, designed to test your compliance, your adaptability, your resonance. Each rule successfully navigated, each spectral encounter weathered, brings you closer to the required vibrational frequency for successful integration. Suddenly, the station's ancient POS system crackled to life, not with an announcement, but with a sound that chilled me to the bone, the high-pitched, hollow, endlessly looping laughter of children, accompanied by that rhythmic thump-thump of a jump rope. It was coming from all around us, from the very walls. Rule 3, amplified, weaponized. At the same moment, the doors to the relay room burst open, and the bride glided in, her tattered, soaked dress trailing behind her, her eyes like twin wells of infinite sorrow fixed on me. But there was something else in her gaze now. Something predatory. She was no longer just asking for directions. She was drawn by the escalating ritualistic energy, a key component in Salvo's horrifying design. And from down the main tunnel, a sound I hadn't heard before, but one that resonated with a primal dread. The distant, mournful, but rapidly approaching whistle of a steam locomotive. A sound that hadn't echoed in these tunnels for nearly a century. The Phantom 247 train. Salvo was orchestrating a symphony of horrors, and I was its intended crescendo. The time for integration is at hand, Mr. Holt, Salvo said, his eyes gleaming with a fanatical light. He produced a small, intricately carved obsidian knife from his belt, its edge glittering in the flickering light. The platform calls for its due. He lunged. Cassie screamed. The bride glided closer, her cold, spectral hand reaching for me. The children's laughter reached a deafening, maddening pitch. The train whistle shrieked, impossibly near. All 3 rules, all 3 supernatural horrors, were converging on me in a terrifying, orchestrated maelstrom. Salvo's obsidian knife arced towards me. I stumbled back, a desperate surge of adrenaline coursing through me. Cassie, with a surprising shout of defiance, flung her heavy research tablet at Salvo's head. It connected with a sickening thud, momentarily staggering him, the tablet clattering to the floor, its screen shattering. "Run! Darren!" she yelled. The bride was almost upon me, her icy touch promising a cold beyond comprehension. The scent of burnt wood and grave mold was overpowering. I shoved past her, or rather, through a part of her, a sensation like passing through a freezing, wet cobweb that clung to my skin, and bolted from the relay room, back onto the main platform. The station was a cacophony of horrors. The children's laughter echoed from every shadowed corner, a maddening, endless loop. The phantom train's whistle was ear-splitting now, accompanied by the rhythmic chuffing of a steam engine and the screech of ghostly wheels on rusted tracks. And from the mouth of the south tunnel, a single, massive, ancient headlight cut through the gloom, bearing down on the platform. Salvo recovered, his face contorted in a mask of cold fury, pursued me, the obsidian knife still glinting in his hand. He was faster than he looked. I had to break the pattern, disrupt Salvo's horrifying symphony. The rules. I had to defy them, all of them, completely and utterly. The bride glided onto the platform before me, blocking my path, her hand outstretched, her sorrowful eyes fixed on mine. The church. The one that burned, she whispered, her voice no longer just a sigh, but filled with a desperate, yearning urgency. This time, I didn't point to the north tunnel. I looked her directly in her bottomless eyes. "There is no church, Eleanor," I said, the name from the locket, my dearest E, springing to my lips unbidden. "It's gone. They're all gone. There's nothing left for you there." A sound like shattering glass emanated from her, a tremor passing through her spectral form. Her eyes, for a fleeting instant, seemed to focus, a flicker of shocked, agonizing recognition in their depths. Then the sorrow returned, intensified, and she let out a low, ululating wail that seemed to shake the very foundations of the station. The phantom train was almost upon us, its headlight a blinding inferno. A spectral passenger, the same anxious man who'd asked about the 247, materialized at the platform edge, his hand raised. "The 247, he rasped, his voice filled with an eternity of waiting. Is it late? There's no 247 train." I yelled at him, raw defiance in my voice. "It's never coming. It's a lie." The spectral passenger recoiled as if struck, his form flickering violently before dissolving into a cloud of acrid, ozone-scented mist. The approaching train whistle faltered, its pitch dropping into a discordant groan. Salvo was closing in, his obsidian knife raised. The children's laughter, louder now, seemed to be coming from the very air around me, from the grimy tiles beneath my feet. Instead of fleeing from it, I turned towards the mouth of the tunnel where Danny Knox had vanished, the source of that unending hollow mirth. "All right, you little bastards!" I screamed into the darkness, my voice cracking with a mixture of terror and rage. "You want to play? Let's play." I plunged into the tunnel, my flashlight beam cutting a swathe through the oppressive blackness. The laughter intensified, surrounding me, pressing in. And then I saw them. Not clearly, but as shifting, child-sized shadows, their forms indistinct, their eyes like glowing embers in the dark. They weren't playing. They were tending to a section of the tunnel wall that pulsed with a faint, sickly green light, a section where the stones seemed to be breathing. And within that pulsing green light, I saw a face. Danny Knox's face, his eyes wide with terror, his mouth open in a silent scream, his features slowly, horrifyingly, merging with the cold, damp stone. The station itself was revolting against my defiance. The ground beneath my feet heaved. The lights on the platform exploded in showers of sparks. The ancient tiles cracked and split. The Phantom 247 train, its form now flickering and unstable, derailed with a monstrous screeching crash of spectral metal. Just as it reached the platform, its ghostly carriages collapsing in on themselves, releasing a chorus of wails and whispers. Salvo, caught in the maelstrom, screamed as a section of the platform roof gave way, raining down concrete and rusted rebar. The obsidian knife clattered from his grasp. He was momentarily buried, his cries muffled. The bride, her wail now a sound of cosmic despair, seemed to grow in stature, her tattered dress swirling around her like a storm cloud. The air around her crackled with an immense, sorrowful power. She was no longer just a lost soul. She was the station's grief, its accumulated tragedy unleashed. She turned her terrible, sorrowful gaze towards the struggling form of Everett Salvo. The chaos in the Bowdoin Undercroft was apocalyptic. The spectral train lay in a twisted, ethereal wreck across the tracks, its dying whistle a mournful sigh that slowly faded into the cacophony of the crumbling station, and the bride's sorrowful, rage-filled keening. The children's mocking laughter had turned into shrieks of what sounded like fear, or perhaps displacement, as their connection to the station, to Danny Knox's fading essence in the wall, was violently disrupted. Salvo, clawing his way out from under a pile of debris, his face bloody, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and fanatical fury, spotted the obsidian knife lying near the platform edge. He lunged for it, but the bride was faster. She glided towards him, no longer a sorrowful supplicant, but an avenging angel of the underworld, her form radiating an icy, consuming cold. The scent of burnt wood and damp earth filled the station, overpowering even the smell of dust and decay. She reached Salvo just as his fingers closed around the hilt of the knife. Her spectral hands now tipped with what looked like elongated, icicle-sharp talons closed over his. Salvo screamed, a sound that was horrifyingly cut short as an intense blue-white light flared from where the bride touched him. His body arched, convulsed, and then seemed to dissolve, crumbling into a pile of gray dust and whispering ashes that were instantly scattered by a sudden, violent gust of wind that roared up from the tunnels. A wind that carried the scent of wind, roared up, roared, ancient despair, and the faint, metallic tang of 1,000 forgotten sorrows. The obsidian knife clattered to the ground, now cold and inert. With Salvo gone, the violent energies disrupting the station began to subside. The children's shrieks faded, replaced by a profound, echoing silence. The ethereal wreckage of the 247 train flickered and vanished. The bride stood alone on the devastated platform, her form slowly becoming more translucent, her sorrowful keening softening into a low, mournful hum. She looked at me, her eyes no longer empty pits, but filled with a vast, weary understanding. Then, she too began to fade, dissolving into the lingering mist like a half-forgotten dream, leaving behind only the faint, lingering scent of scorched roses. Cassie, bruised and covered in dust but otherwise unharmed, helped me to my feet. We stood there for a long moment, amidst the debris of the once orderly platform, the silence broken only by the drip of water and our own ragged breathing. Platform 13, and the horrors it guarded, had been pacified, or perhaps merely reset. The official story, after we were eventually found by a bewildered early morning maintenance crew, was a localized seismic event coupled with a catastrophic electrical failure in the antiquated Bowdoin Undercroft. Everett Salvo was listed as missing, presumed to have perished in the structural collapse. Danny Knox remained a missing person, another lost soul swallowed by the city's indifferent underbelly. Our wilder tales of spectral brides, phantom trains, and necromantic rituals were, of course, dismissed as trauma-induced delusion. Cassie, true to her academic nature, wrote a heavily redacted, deeply unsettling thesis on liminal spaces and enduring folkloric manifestations in the Boston transit system, carefully omitting our direct experiences, but hinting at the terrifying truths that lay beneath the official narratives. She moved to the West Coast shortly after, needing, she said, a significant amount of sunshine and a distinct lack of subterranean history. I couldn't leave Boston, or perhaps Boston and the Bowdoin Undercroft couldn't leave me. They reassigned me, after a lengthy psychological evaluation, to a less demanding role: day shift, ticketing, customer service at the bustling Park Street station. But every night in my dreams I return to the Bowdoin Undercroft. I see the flickering lights, smell the burnt wood and damp earth. I hear the distant, hollow laughter of children. And sometimes, when I'm working late, alone in the echoing stillness of Park Street after the last train has departed, I'll catch a faint scent of scorched roses. The station clock will stutter, and a pale, sorrowful woman in a tattered, soaked wedding dress will glide silently to my booth. She doesn't ask for directions anymore. She doesn't need to. She just looks at me with those ancient, knowing eyes, and I know that my shift, my true shift, as the unofficial, unwilling tender of Boston's hidden sorrows, the new gatekeeper of whatever sleeps fitfully beneath the city, has just begun. The platform always needs its attendant, and the rules I've learned are less about survival and more about who gets to write the next entry in its long, lamenting ledger. The last 3 rules are now unspoken, unwritten, but carved into the very fabric of my being. And sometimes, when a new, overly curious night worker asks me about the old Bowdoin station, I just hand them a crumpled, coffee-stained note and tell them that some tunnels are best left unexplored.